Hello everybody, this is your hostess Flamingo Writer here speaking to you all once again, and welcome back to another Magical Girl podcast video. However, if there's one creator that I've never got to explore on my channel, it's Go Nagai. For those who don't know, Go Nagai is one of many mangaka out there, so much so that his works are expanded since the 1970s and so on. Even to this day, his works are still being made, and before Dragon Ball became a thing, you can bet that he was already someone who still became Master of Shonen before Arika Todomura came to the title. However, you might know him best for some of his other works, like, say, Devilman, for instance. And while I admit that Devilman is one of, if not his most popular works out there, it was far from being the only one that is. That is, until you start reading it, or at least look up for anything you can about Devilman. I recommend checking out other videos because they go more in depth with it than I could have, and what's more, it does look like a fascinating read, even if you've heard of Devilman Cry Baby, but any way you look at it, that's not what we're looking at. No, instead we're looking at something that, if anything, is actually one of his other popular works, but unlike Devilman, where it actually came from the east to the west, this one, however, never made it to the west at all, at least if not internationally. In this case, I'm referring to is Cutie Honey. Cutie Honey is one of his other popular works, but like I said, it seemed like it never came out internationally. And it was also the first, get this, the first Magical Girl series to ever become a shonen demographic. Yeah, this isn't like today where you can basically find any Magical Girl series that's more targeted towards male audiences. This was during the time when it was even rarer back then, and since it did come out during the 70s era, yes, I did say before in another video that I will be talking about other Magical Girl shows that came out before Sailor Moon did, and, well, here we are. But here's the thing. While Cutie Honey is one of those series that I have heard before, I haven't actually read it, and one of the things you're going to know about Go Nagai's works is that they're not afraid to go violent, if it wasn't obvious from his own works. Not to say that's a bad thing, but, well, you'll see why when I get to it as well. However, this is one case where Cutie Honey actually did last for a long while, from what I can tell, and it's not hard to see why that is. See, in case you guys don't know, Cutie Honey itself came from the 70s, and to this day, while it's not as popular as some other Magical Girl shows out there that came internationally, Cutie Honey was actually popular in Japan, and they also had it to expand into different forms. Yeah, unlike something like Pretty Cure, which actually has a bunch of different seasons and lasted or kind of over 20 years at this point. Cutie Honey actually lasted longer, but nowhere near as enough seasons as it is. But I wouldn't say seasons, after all. I mean, Pretty Cure actually has multiple seasons, and you can pretty much jump around and pick and choose whatever season you can. As for Cutie Honey, well, it's more like, say, an entire franchise that had to last a little longer for its years, but didn't really have as much gateway as. However, I'm not here to talk about all of the Cutie Honey seasons or series out there, because if I did that, then this video would probably come out a little later than it should have. But to be honest with you guys, I have tried to watch Cutie Honey before, but instead of talking about all of the seasons, I decided to talk about one of them, that series being Cutie Honey Flash. Released from 1996 to 1997, Cutie Honey Flash is one of those series that was made by Toei Animation, as do with some of the other brands of the series. But also, it's worth noting that this was also called the 6th season after Sailor Stars ended in the 5th season of Sailor Moon, which is kind of weird considering that not only is it because the both creators are nowhere near related with each other, but it's also worth noting that they weren't even made by the same person indirectly anyways. I'm guessing it's because of almost the same staff, and if you look at it for yourself, yeah, you can tell there are some Sailor Moon prints here and there. Though admittedly, they actually shifted from shonen to shoujo, which is not always something you see in a lot of cases, but I guess I'm ahead of myself when I get right down to it. I would talk about the other series, but, well, we'll come back to that at the end of this video while I'm not doing that. And, well, I guess you could say that the violence itself in here, yeah, it's not as extreme as some of the other international original stuff that Go Nagai has worked, but this is definitely more like the tame ones, or say the underappreciated one, because as far as I can tell, this one doesn't get brought up a lot. I mean, maybe there has, and I'm just missing out on a community that I can tell, but Cutie Honey Flash never really seemed to go anywhere outside of their other brands. You're more than likely to see the original series or some other brands, but this one, not as much. And that's not to say that the series itself is bad or anything, it's just one of those cases where I think it's more overlooked than anything else. But don't say it's a Sailor Moon ripoff, please, because like I said, don't say it's a ripoff if you've never seen it, even if you have seen a bit of the art style. So, I'm about to change your life, and let's talk about Cutie Honey Flash. I should preference by saying that unlike the other Cutie Honey universes, still expand the horizon of this year franchise, this is one case where I need to preference by saying that unlike the other series, this one's a little different. But let's talk about the ones that actually had something a little different from the series we're talking about today. See, Cutie Honey, despite her appearance, is not all of what she seems to be. See, in the other franchises, it's established that despite looking human, it's here where she's actually made into a robot. And yes, she doesn't notice this until later on after her father dies, because, well, she was already having it a secret behind her. But anyway, look at it, she does do something that not a lot of magical girls do. See, she does transform into someone else, mostly an alter ego that she has a neck collar known as the Matter Transformer, and from there on she transforms into any alter ego as he goes along to beat the final bad of the series, Sister Jill, who runs an organization known as Panther her Claw, and from there she does that to avenge her father's death. Now, the series that we're looking at is kind of like that, but it's also worth noting that they're not exactly the similarities. They do have the same villains, like, say, Panther Claw's organization with Sister Jill running it, but there's a little difference in the 1996 series. While her human appearance still stays the same, and yes, she does have the same designs that she had in the other franchises, here, however, she's not a robot. Instead, she's flesh and blood from a human. And yeah, her dad is the one who took care of her, and the episode itself is a little different from the other franchises. See, instead of having the first episode have the father killed, which seems implied that way because in the episode itself, at the end of the first episode, he somehow survives through the plane that crashed anyways. Okay, it's technically a helicopter, but you still get what I mean anyways. But yeah, apparently instead of getting killed, because we don't see him getting out of it with Sister Jill and the other organization, instead, Cutie Honey sees her father actually had almost died from the helicopter crash, but instead of dying, he somehow survives through that, because episodes later we see him all tied up and everything. Maybe it's plot armor, which I never thought I'd use that phrase in my own channel before now, but yeah, I don't know how you can live through a helicopter crash from there when we didn't even see you get out of it. Maybe they teleported in, I wouldn't know, because Sister Jill is someone that we might have to explore a little more. But besides that, however, it's here where we say in the first couple of episodes, Cutie Honey has to do whatever she can while turning into some kind of alter ego in the process, and it says Honey Flash, and from there on she does whatever she can in order to get her father back, and as well as beat Sister Jill as the time goes on. I will say for a series like this, it's as standard as you can get for something like that, but I think that may be a reason why some people say it could be a sixth season of Sailor Moon, not just because of made by the same people that made us Sailor Moon, although it had most of the same staff, but it's also pretty clear that it's a little different from the usual brands. Like, sometimes the series itself does delve into something that's violent when it comes to something like that, but unlike the other ones, this one is tame compared from what I've heard of it, and it doesn't help the fact that, well, besides having his 39 episodes, this one actually doesn't have as much story arcs as, say, Sailor Moon did. I will say that despite the arcs being a little shorter than they usually are, some people just seem to think that that takes too long for its story to get telling, which I'm not so sure if it's just me talking out of my ass when I ask this question, but how is 39 episodes too long to process? I mean, compared to a lot of episodes to anime these days, especially shonen, I actually have a lot more episodes to deal with if you've actually been following along like I. I'm guessing it has to do with the pacing in of itself, however, which, yeah, let's talk about the pacing for just a quick moment. I hear a lot of people say that Magical Girl shows have this habit of showing the episodes episodic first and then go on to doing their story arc. But here, I think it's actually a bit like that. Despite having 39 episodes in a singular season, it actually does feel like the pacing itself does feel a little wonky in some cases. Not to say it's all bad necessarily, but it does kind of feel like the series itself, at first glance, would start off what you expect. Honey trying to find her father before they kill him, and then go so far as to say that he has to find ways to get back to his daughter in time before he gets killed, and then the pacing itself does go into places where you expect them to go by. Sometimes it does feel like the episodes themselves start off episodic, and then later on you get to see the joint ride that it's basically them just doing just that. They'll just let's go into episodic mode, then go into the fashion story. But speaking of the father, I think have to say that his father, despite being a scientist, I have to say he really did very well with the matter transformer. Like, seriously, it's just a neck collar, a ring, and basically a bit of an arm pad and stuff, but I really like what the details are. I also like this year's sword, and this was before Utena became a thing, so you can definitely bet the sword itself looks pretty good and nice in itself. Okay, it's not, they say it's not a sword, it's a Flair or something like that. I'm so bad at these names, so I do apologize for that. But either way, I'm kind of a sucker for magical girls with swords involved in it. Maybe it's because of how much I've watched Utena and Magic Knight Ray Earth, how they use swords, and then you see them use wands and stuff. But like I said in my Friendship Squad video, I'm kind of a sucker for cute weapons like that. Though they're certainly more badass than what Friendship Squad had, I'll say that. But also I want to point out that I did say before that the alter egos in this year's series are a little different. You know how most Magical Girl shows always have this alter ego where it's basically similar to their original counterparts? Well, I did say this in my Fans and Thieves Jean video, except unlike that series where they didn't find out until a little later on who Jean really was when they found out it was Maron. Here, however, it seems like no one seemed to bat an eye when Cutie Honey was actually Honey the whole time anyways. I get they have the same name and everything, but still, would you know the difference between this spiky-haired pink girl between the blonde-haired girl I showed earlier? Maybe it's just me, but I feel like that could be a double-edged sword. Double-edged sword. But I think that's really what I think, however. The series itself knows that Honey is indeed Honey Flash, and as well as alter egos that I don't have the time to go over all of her alter egos, but if I did that, we'd be here for all eternity. And I'm not having it happen because, well, she has so many alter egos in this, yeah, she usually transforms into some of them just to fool the villain, which is honestly creative, but I wouldn't say she turns into all of them in the same episode. Or every now and then. She does transform into most that you see throughout it, like Motorcycle Honey, who is Hurricane Honey, or say, hey, Nurse Honey, and there's also Elegant Honey, and so on. Yeah, there's also Scoop Honey, which I have to say is a lot more clever than you realize, but like I said, if I listed all of the alter egos she turned into, we'd be here all day. But throughout most of the series, you do get the sudden urge that her friends, as well as some others that help out along the way, do manage to do whatever they can to make sure that they can to help out, to find her father and such. But like I said, they don't really do this throughout the series. You would think that for a series like this, they would at least try to go so far to find her father, and then on they'll just go so far out of their way, just say that, yeah, we finally got the father back at the last episode. But no, I'm glad they didn't drag it out for too long, because if they did that, the pacing itself would probably be more horrendous than you think. But no, apparently they actually do get him back, but it's pretty stupid how they do it from when he did get back from Honey. Let me explain. For context, Honey's father does come back after he gets rescued finally, but it doesn't really take him that long until he starts saying, well, I'm gonna go back to Sister Jill for a moment. Now, at first glance, I thought that was like, say, a doppelganger or something like that when they tried tricking him or something like that, because, well, doppelgangers are usually easy to pull off, especially when it comes to something like this, is, when it comes to having a child character or teenager character, depending how old they are. But yeah, apparently he just says no and stuff like that just to go back to Sister Jill. Dude, you just went back to your own daughter just to go back to her, and now you're just going to leave again because of that? That's pretty stupid. Or cold, if you want to hear more about that, anyways. And it's not as though that the series itself doesn't explore how dumb this is or anything. It's just Honey doesn't understand why this is happening. Like, seriously, you were just picking up your daughter from the first episode for her 16th birthday, and then after that you just go so far out of your way just to and do just that. Maybe I'm reading too much into it, but why would you go back to the villain who kidnapped you, and then after that you just go after her, that just to go back to your daughter, and then after that go back to the villain again, and then just come back again? Maybe it's just me, and maybe they're trying to say some kind of tension or something like that, but again, that doesn't make any sense. I mean, seriously, if I had a child that really misses me and everything, I would have stayed with them. I wouldn't go back to the person who kidnapped me. Or are we meant to imply there's something there that we haven't seen? Don't read it too much into that. Thankfully, it doesn't drag out as long as it is, but then we have to talk about a character that I personally felt like there was so much potential that they had with her, but it doesn't really last as long as you may expect. This character being Misty Honey. Misty Honey, for those who don't know, was not an original manga character, but rather a character originally made from this anime, and she does appear later on in different versions of it, mostly Cutie Honey universe. And I'm not gonna lie, I actually do like what they do with her. Despite being a rival character for the episodes that she does appear in the second arc of the series, we do get to see that she's not all of what she appears. Her original name being Sieta. What is it with every girl being named Sieta? So, all of a sudden. Anyway, Sieta here was actually not really human, but rather a robot in this year's series, and as well as one that tries to beat Honey and makes her seem like that she's the twin sister of Honey, so much so that she tries beating her and getting her father into the process, and from there on she does everything she can to take her father away from her because she never had a real family before now. Despite what you may think, I think this may be a chance where I have to say this is maybe a tragic story for a rival character. You don't really hear that many rival characters in anime, or in this case magical girl shows, just to show what they can do with them. I'm not gonna lie, I kind of like what they did with her. Unfortunately, she doesn't stay that long, which is kind of sad because I felt like there was something they could have done, like say maybe make her redeem herself, or maybe have a little redemption arc here and there. But unfortunately, we don't really get that far anyways. Instead, later on in the series, after they're trying to beat Sister Jill, or in this case the Twilight Prince, because they seem to have this notion where Misty does fall for him. Hey, I can't really blame her. But however, it seems like afterwards she does pull an intermitting sacrifice just so she can save Honey in the process. I'm not gonna lie, this does feel tragic in a lot of ways. It's absolutely pretty tear-jerking when you see that, despite Misty Honey having her moments where she wants to beat Honey and stuff like that. You get this implication that maybe there's something more to her than just that. Though, admittedly, I think that maybe just be me, because I'm sick and tired of rivals just being there, just being bitter and everything like that. I know it's really a common thing for my any rivals to have a lot of these here moments where they can be bitter, but does anyone feel like they could have done anything to make themselves sound a little more remorseful? I don't know, maybe I'm being a snowflake when I say that. Man, now that I say that out loud, maybe people are going to find me pushy when I say that. But despite that, however, I do like what they do with her, and while she's not in it for very long, you'll never forget her once you see her. But speaking of the characters, you may have noticed I don't talk about a lot of the other characters, like, say, Honey's friends, or someone like Sienna, or, say, other characters that do appear in this year's series. Well, that's because there's not a lot I can say about them. At least not in this here version, or some things I could say about it. Because, get this, whenever I do try looking up the series, there were some moments that kept me from watching this series all and stuff when watching it years ago. But I'll get to that when we get to it. For now, let's talk about Sister Jill, because there's a lot to unpack with her. Now, Sister Jill, even if she is the main antagonist through most of these here Cutie Honey series, she's actually a lot more devious than you may think she is. I will say that I do like her design. I really don't think I've ever seen a villain this far out of her way just to look like she can use her claws just to go ahead and beat the same heroine when it comes right down to it. And when you see her from this perspective, it does look like she would have the audacity to beat her until the last episode. Okay, I'm just gonna come out and say this. The last episode itself, despite sounding like it could have been a little better for how they could have beaten Sister Jill, I really feel like they could have at least beaten her to say they did so, because in the last episode, they really looked like they were gonna do the final bidding of this here episode, but instead of doing that, she just vanishes off. Yeah. And, well, I don't want to say this because I know that she really is the male villain of this year's series, but I'm just gonna come out and ask why they had to beat her so anticlimactically like that. I get that it would take a long while for doing that already, but even taking that in the last two episodes before that, you didn't have any problem with beating her into something like that. But in the last episode, you just made her just vanish into thin air. Really? But aside from that, from the episodes we do get beforehand, she does seem very intimidating, even when she tries her absolute damnness to transform into one that does seem like she wants to beat her father or try to kill him. And I have to admit, though, that's really something that you don't see all that often when it comes to magical girl villains. Usually they just threaten to kill them and stuff like that, when almost she looks like she was going to anyways. I did hear that she had a human form before or any of these year series or afterwards, but it's kind of sad that in this year series you don't really see her human form, only her villain form, which maybe it's just me, but I would have loved to see what her human form would have looked like. But it's basically almost the same thing, just with blonde hair and a thin body, so yeah, not that much besides that, but hey, what are you gonna do about it anyways? But I guess I think it's only time to talk about the technical stuff. If you've seen the pictures of this here style, I did say that this was animated by Toei Animation and some of the same staff members that worked on Sailor Moon, and you can clearly tell the eye shading, the characters having the same sort of music theme going on for it as well, and so on. Yeah, this here series was made by Toei Animation, and you can definitely tell that this was during the time when they were still experimenting with their budgets a little more than what they had in their previous works. I will say that this isn't anything new. I mean, Toei Animation, and much of my knowledge, probably was the first ever studio to ever do this sort of genre, but I guess you can be the judge of that. I mean, seriously, I haven't seen any of Sally the Witch yet. It might be a while to do so already. But either way you look at it, I can't really say that I dislike it anyways. But remember when I said that this series was tame when it comes to violence? Yeah, I said that before, and I'll say it again. Go Nagai is not shy to show any violence in his works, but I guess that's only because during the time period they were still doing it anyways. And some people will say that when it comes to violence, that doesn't make a good story, when I'm just here saying, how? I mean, if you just put nothing but violence for the sake of violence, I can kind of understand. But if you just put violence in a story, just prove that you can still make into it, then I think you're pretty fine overall with that. Unfortunately, when it comes to Cutie Honey, there is a little confession I have to make when it comes to this here series. And that has to do with how long it took me to watch this. Oh boy. For starters, this wasn't my first time ever watching Cutie Honey, because back then, when I was still trying to find some more magical girls to add to my own watch list, this was one of those cases where I wanted to watch Cutie Honey and see what the fuss was about. Unfortunately, I couldn't really watch all of this series back then due to a number of reasons. One, since this was around 2024 when I started my Magical Girl podcast, I actually wanted to see if this here series was good for myself and add it to the list I had. But if you've been following me for a while now, then you already know that never made it to the final product. I started watching this series back heck then, sure, but even I'll admit I never put it into the first batch of episodes in that podcast, considering I only did 13 during that time. This would have been in another episode, but I wanted to take a break during that time, considering I had not just those take-ons that I don't like doing anymore, but as well as some other stuff behind the scenes. The other thing is that this series, despite having 39 episodes, doesn't help my case when I started watching another series during the time period that I wanted to catch. Yeah, if you ever wonder why I don't talk about a lot of series, especially because I want to get as much shows as I can, well, there was another series that I actually started watching when it first aired, but I never really got to finish it that time. That series being The Owl House. No, I'm not kidding. I actually did try to watch it when it first aired during the time when it first came out, but unfortunately when it first came out, not only was I even busier with my full-time job during the time, but I also didn't really catch up with it due to the moving around thing. Yeah, I really move around so many more times than I could count, since I really did that a lot. And what's worse, I had to catch up with this show back in 2024 to see what I was missing out on. Yeah, I will say this, however, if you guys are going to think I should do an episode of The Owl House, despite it not being a Magical Girl show, even if it was somewhat influenced by it, then let me tell you this for the record. I'm not doing a video on The Owl House. Not because I don't like it. Hell, I do enjoy the show even when I watched it with my friends and everything in my own server. But the problem has to do with the fact that what else is there for me to say that hasn't already been said about The Owl House at this point? Like, seriously, after watching the show for myself and as well as my other friends that love it as well, you can bet that I really didn't have any time to watch this show back then. But even taking that in, I couldn't really watch this show in of itself because, well, like I said, I really had a lot on my plate as is. It's really sad when you realize that, despite that, however, I was going to immediately try to do a video on it, but there's a lot of other videos that can do a better job of The Owl House than I could have. Hell, even some people that put a lot of dedication into their love letter into the The Owl House in of itself. So yeah, I can't really do a video on this here series, even if there is something there that I wish for you all to see if you haven't seen it. But that's not the worst part when it comes to Cutie Honey's procrastination on my part. No, the other part has to do with the fact about how long it took me to watch this, and unfortunately, I need to at least stress enough that this is another reason why this video took really longer than it should. So, you remember 9anime? You know, that site where you can find any anime you want, even when it comes to having some series that are something you can watch for yourself. Well, apparently you can't really watch it no more because during the time I was watching Cutie Honey, I wanted to see the sub for myself and see what I was missing out on during the time. I did get to watch a few episodes of it back then, but during the time of making the production of this video when I was trying to make Cutie Honey Flash, unfortunately I couldn't really watch all of this here series on 9anime due to the fact that not only was short on time, but I was also the fact that, get this, 9anime shut down last month. So there was no way I could have easily find this series in fan subs, even if I could. And the worst part is, I really couldn't really find any place to watch it. You could say I could watch cartoons and anime for that, but unfortunately they only have 9 out of the 39 episodes. So mathematically speaking, that's about 30 episodes less than I could have, and that's not even the worst part. The worst part is I actually had to go onto Internet Archive. Now, Internet Archive does have a bunch of anime that seems to be lost media or some other stuff out there if you can find it elsewhere, depending on how good the quality is. But while the qualities themselves are pretty fine, the problem is that there are no subtitles. So yeah, like I said, despite all of that, Cutie Honey Flash never got an official fans release, and what's more, they were only VHS or DVD recordings. So whether you like it or not, that's the only way you're gonna find this here series elsewhere if you want to see the full series for yourself. It doesn't help my case when you realize that it's also worth noting that they did have it on Blu-ray or DVD release, but only in Japan. The series itself never got its save made internationally, and thus you can't find it anywhere you look. And that in of itself is pretty sad. I'm not gonna encourage my fans to do or see websites, if anything, because, well, I know some people aren't going to do that, especially because the internet these days, it's really hard to say what's been lost and what's been track of time. But I must stress enough that Cutie Honey Flash is one of those shows that, despite my home griefs of how long it took me to watch, I must confess that I didn't want any of this to happen. I didn't want to push off Cutie Honey this far. I really didn't want to do that. But I must stress enough, despite that, however, I still feel like Cutie Honey is one of those series that I personally still had beef with, even if I could have had it a little more than that. But the truth is, I'm not so sure how many people would want to watch Cutie Honey Flash, even if you aren't someone who doesn't understand Japanese. Hell, just by watching a bunch of anime, I can't interpret Japanese, even if I could try. Seriously, my English accent is bad enough, even if I have a little Spanish in me. And I'm just here saying that if you want us to not to go through illegal websites, then it's best for you to at least give it a Blu-ray or physical release, or better yet, find a website that could have done so. I thought at first I did find a website where I could find this, but get this, every time I tried watching an episode, they restarted from the very beginning with the theme song, and they just keep skipping it over and over again. Maybe it's a problem with the website, or maybe there's something there that have made it hard to watch at times, but I must stress enough that this was probably hard for me to look through, even if I did try. And unfortunately, I hate to leave that off on a dour note, because I still think Cutie Honey is one of the most important magical girl shows out there. And I'm not saying that because it actually brought something new to the table. I'm saying this because it seems like a series that you would at least try to watch if you want something a little edgy for your own good anyways. Granted, I wouldn't say Cutie Honey Flash is an edgy series worth talking about all the time, but it's an important enough series to at least say without it, we probably wouldn't have gotten something for the magical girl genre that was made for a male demographic. But the one I talked about was more of a shoujo demographic, considering about, you guessed it, merchandise to sell toys. And you might be asking yourself a question you might be all wondering at the top of your head. You're probably wondering right now, would I ever cover any more of Cutie Honey's other franchise series? Unfortunately, no. I'm not saying I don't like Cutie Honey, but if you've been following me for a while, especially what I said in my Tokyo Mew Mew video, I said before I wouldn't want to talk about a remake or something like that. I mean, say what you want about Pretty Cure, at least it actually has a bunch of different seasons, and what's more, you can pretty much watch and choose whatever ones that seem like a good title for you. But Cutie Honey is one of those series that I'm not so sure if I want to talk about all of them. Plus, I already talked about Cutie Honey in this year's series, and despite their differences between the other series that they had before and afterwards, then I think that's really enough to say that I can still see why some people would at least try to watch it if they could anyways. It's more of an old otaku series if you want to see that, but that's really a story for another person to cover if they had. Should you watch Cutie Honey is up to you, but I think it's a safe bet that Cutie Honey is one of those shows that I personally feel bad that it never got internationally. Say what you want about something like Devilman, it actually did get its own release elsewhere, but Cutie Honey, I'm guessing it's because it's a female demographic show and therefore it won't go as well. You know, that's one thing I never understood with people, saying that it's because it's made for female audiences and therefore it should not go very well. Maybe it's because you guys just don't give it a chance or something like that. I'm not saying I don't like anything that's a male demographic or anything, but at the same time, part of me feels like that's really the only thing that people will watch, if there's nothing else to consume anyways. Why else do you think that people think that shoujo or josei is dying out to this day? I'm gonna just preference by saying that I'm not here to tell people what to watch and what they shouldn't watch, because you can pretty much bet it's really up to you guys to decide what that is. And with that, that's all I have to say about Cutie Honey of itself. Like I said, I don't want to talk about the other series because I really feel like I'm going to be repeating myself if I do. But I think that this video will help you understand why it took me so long to watch it. I understand that this video, might not come out until during the weekend, but that's beside the point. But after this video, maybe, and I think I can do a live stream just to chill out with you guys and show a little more of my creations if I want to. But until then, I thank you all so much for watching. I'll see you all next time, and as always, stay flamingo-tastic. I'll see you all around.